Oh, it's good to have you on the show today. You are welcome.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Could you introduce yourself, like tell us more? Like they
Mhm.
really need to know who you are before we dive into the conversation.
Well, thank you very much. Sheon Idris is my name. I tag myself as someone who is as simple as ABC. I am easygoing. I take things the way they come. I kind of someone that associates with a lot of people. So that's one of the things that has really, it's part of my DNA, makes me acceptable wherever I am, wherever I go. It makes
Yeah,
life easy for me, and just live life every day the way you see it. So that's,
absolutely.
yeah. So, I mean, professionally, I'm a chartered accountant, right? So something I've been doing now for over 17 years, counting, right? Works in various organizations, big four, small firms, medium firms in Nigeria, and now also doing the same thing there in Canada as well. So, yeah, that's just a little bit about myself.
That's interesting, right? And I know that aside from what you do, like 9 to 5, you also do some other things. I think you also tutor,
Yeah,
if I'm correct, right? So
yeah,
I'm really just wondering how you're able to balance all of those together. But we'll
mm,
dive further into that in this conversation.
absolutely.
Why did you pursue your career in chartered accounting? And when you did you
Mm.
have the big fours in mind?
Well, I think that's a very interesting question. My professional journey as an accountant, I would say started way back, right from while I was in secondary school.
Okay.
I mean, from the get-go, I knew exactly what I wanted. If you recall, as at that time, once you finish your GSS 3 classes, there's this segregation that happens. Some people are automatically taken to science, some commercial, and some, art. So,
True.
well, in terms of where should I, be based on my academic performance, it was obviously, science student, right? But I chose commercial class, right? Because I wanted, I knew what I wanted, you know, I wanted to be an accountant, because I have a role model, someone within the family who is a chartered accountant, so it was someone I still look up to, right?
Oh,
So
correct.
that kind of, you know, patterned every other thing, right? In terms of the subjects I had to take, in terms of, curriculums,
Yeah.
everything around me was modeled from that point, right? So it's it's a field that I'm passionate about, right? And I mean, economics was obviously my best subject, then in school.
Oh,
So
great.
yeah.
So the big fours, did you have them in mind somewhere along the line, probably when you were in university, or big fours just happened after university, you working with them?
Okay, so I think to respond to that question, it would be nice to just talk a little bit about, my professional, journey, right?
Yeah,
So
great.
I didn't start with the big four, I mean, I
Okay.
started working with a small firm, you know,
Hmm.
people call these firms small firms, but I call them big but mighty, right? Because that's where you really get the rudimentary accounting training, right? So now for me, I became a chartered accountant even before graduating from the university, right? So that really helped me to quickly commence a professional career, right? So I started with a smaller firm, then moved to a medium firm, before transcending to the big four. So what happened was that while I was at the medium firm, I somewhat was at a peak, right? I was at a senior manager within that firm. But it does happen that because I'm someone that I'm always constantly looking for knowledge, right? And Big Four, they have that methodology, they have that processes, they have the systems and everything, right?
Yeah.
So because I wasn't satisfied that I already knew what I was supposed to know, at that level. So that drove me to searching for opportunities within the Big Four, right? And that was how I found myself working specifically with Ernst Young Nigeria. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Interesting. And I think two things stood out for me so far. You said you chose accounting because you knew what you wanted to do before university, like from secondary school, you knew what you wanted to do. That's
Absolutely.
really stood out for me because in some other people's case, even myself, right? Like I had to change what I wanted to do in JSS3 was not what I eventually did when I
Wow.
got to the university, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
what I'm currently doing. So I've
Mm-hmm.
had to make a couple of switches. But for you,
Which,
it's interesting. Like you knew what you wanted, you went all
yes,
out for it, and that is what you're doing today. And the
exactly.
second thing, yeah. And the second thing that stood out for me is your, should I call it quest for knowledge? You always want to learn more, know more, right? And I
Exactly.
think that's what you said pushed you to the big four. Am
Exactly.
I correct? Yeah. So
Yes.
that's really interesting.
And at some
Wow. So moving,
point, sorry, and at some point when I believed at acquired the basic knowledge from the Big Four, I should leave the Big Four again to another medium firm. Now, the focus now is not necessarily technical knowledge, right? Because the technical knowledge has been solidified at the Big Four. Now it's go develop portfolios, right? And then begin to develop leadership, business management skills, and every other thing that comes with becoming a successful entrepreneur. So it's always from, what I mean, there's something always driving me at one point in time or the other that patterns what action and what step I eventually, do take.
wow, great. So I've heard a couple of things. You said passion, drive, those two things, and knowledge, making three, those three things like stood out for me so far in this conversation. Right.
Okay.
So now
Yeah.
I want to ask you, in all of your journey so far, what
Mhm.
has really challenged you the most in all of this journey, like right from when you started to practice in the medium firm to big four?
Mhm.
What has been like your biggest challenge?
Wow. Honestly, the kind of job that I do is not something easy. Every day there's always one form of challenge or the other, right? In terms of trying to hit on clients' deadline, in
Yeah.
trying to resolve clients' issues, in trying to deal with human being, because the moment people hear the word auditors, right, what would normally come to their mind is, oh, this person is coming to fault whatever I've done,
What I'm
right?
doing.
And you can imagine situations where people's career, people's source of livelihood,
Mhm.
promotions, and everything is actually tied to what you are doing, right? So there is that tendency to want to kind of wear a biased mindset, right? But
Yeah.
again, you also know that, look, you have a duty to the public, right? Because as an external auditor, 'cause I worked, yes, I'm a chartered accountant, but I worked, the larger part of my life, which is what I currently still do as an external auditor. And so when you work within that industry or within that profession, you have a duty not to your employer or not even to the client, but you have a duty to protect the public interest, right?
Yeah.
So in the in trying to fulfill that duty, we have to uphold certain principles, right? Independence, objectivity, integrity, a whole lot of things, right? So
Yeah.
trying to make sure that you balance the need of your profession while also at the same time not making enemies on a daily basis in the course of your work, is something that, I
Alrighty.
had to contend with, right? So that I would say it's one of the challenges that come with the kind of, job I do. But again, I also try to, ensure that the client understands why certain things, have to be done the way they are done, right? And,
Yeah.
give them that assurance that it's not a witch hunting exercise. It's not someone trying to belittle what you've done, right? But we are trying to do everything in the collective interests of everybody, right? So one of the challenges, I had to face, or I keep, that is inherent within the industry where I find myself. But hey, that's not to mean that we also don't have balance, right? It's not all doom, it's not all negative. There's always room for, having proper work-life balance in the midst of all of this. Because I don't
I
want
can
to scare,
imagine.
I don't I don't want to scare those who has, the mindset of coming into my profession and they're like, hey, I can't deal with this. No, it's not the message I'm passing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because I know that when people hear auditors, there's this fear that just sets in, like, oh no, auditors, I don't want to have anything to do with an auditor.
Mhm.
So I like the fact that you mentioned that. Right. So,
Yeah.
but how have you been able to overcome those challenges, right? And is there anything you would advise somebody looking at, coming into being an auditor, right? What will you advise the person to do if the person is being faced with this type of challenge that you have faced in terms of, clients being fearful? They don't want to talk to auditor, they don't want to relate to auditors, right? So how have you
Mm,
been able to overcome those challenges personally? And again,
mm.
how would you advise somebody coming to your field?
Okay, so the first thing is just know your onions, right? Because once you know your onions, once you are technically sound, right, and the client knows that you know what you are talking about, right, that is one of your greatest weapon, right? So you need to, always put out your points in such a way that it doesn't belittle what the other person have done, right? You also need to, let the other party knows that, look, there's a reason why this has to be done in this manner. And I think most importantly is your human relation skill, right?
Right.
So for me, like I said earlier on, I have that personnel of being able to relate with people, right? Of being able to communicate my view in a way that you understand clearly what exactly I'm trying to talk about, right? So
Yeah.
for those that wants to, or who are currently having challenges and wants to overcome, so what I would just say is just be yourself, right? Be confident about your points, right? Build good interpersonal skill, even with your clients, right? Don't always fight your clients, right? Just make sure that you maintain cordial relationship and they know
Right.
that it's your job. You're also trying to help them, right? Once people know that you're trying to add value to their system, right, and processes, they would embrace it with an open mindset, right, and also trying to set expectations, you know, at the very beginning of the conversation. So that way you are able to say, look, the purpose of this conversation is not to bring you down, it's not to fault whatever you are doing, but it's just a value adding exercise, right? So when you give those kind
Yeah.
of assurances at the beginning, you tend to receive a more, positive outcome from the conversations.
Totally makes sense. Right. So, Idris, one thing you've mentioned is your quest for knowledge, right? And also, I've practically experienced you leaving everything behind and you
Yeah.
moving to a new country for you
Mhm.
to study a course that is totally different from what you do, right? What
Mm,
you used to do back then, right? So,
mm.
now my question to you will be, how have you prioritized growth and innovation when it comes to your career? right? And I'm asking this question because I also, when I met you, I thought about it to say, like, you have a good career, you're working with a great company, you left everything behind, moved to a new country. Now we're both in the same classroom studying
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
course that's not what you do. I used to do
Mhm.
that back then. So, I had a justification for myself coming to study
Mhm.
the course that we studied. But for you, it was a totally different field. So now tell me how you have been able to prioritize growth, innovation as comes to your career path.
Thank you very much. That's a brilliant question. I just want to deviate a little bit, you know,
Yeah, feel free.
yeah, from what you've just said, because like I said earlier on, everything around me, you know, every step I take is always, I mean, they're always intentional, right? So me coming to another country and then studying this particular course is very much aligned with my career growth, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason why I said so is that, back then within the audit profession, there's a lot of emphasis on data analytics.
Data.
Right?
Okay.
There was a lot of
Great.
emphasis on big data, right? There was a lot of emphasis on owning your skill, not as a traditional auditor, right? But as an auditor who is able to speak the language of big data,
Oh,
right?
great.
So that's in itself, that quest for knowledge, you know, to move away from that traditional realm to a technological savvy auditor led to my decision to pursue a program in data analytics. And as a
Yeah.
matter of fact, data analytics is, one of the hot topics, right, within the audit and accounting space, right? Before the euphoria of generative AI, right,
Yeah.
all of what we see now, the buzzword within our profession then was data analytics, right?
Oh,
So exactly. So what's data analytics? So me being able to combine, you know, my accounting skills, auditing skills, and then merging that with big data, was something that was intentional to set me up for success subsequently, which did, worked out the way I actually wanted it to work out, right? Because now, with generative AI and everybody talking about data analytics, it's not
yeah.
something new to me, right? Because I already, through my studies, had to develop that technical knowledge to be able to then apply it into my profession, right?
Right. I think
So,
Idris, you just answered like my next question. Honestly,
okay.
because my next question was going to be like, what's the
Mhm.
trend in your industry that you want people to know about? And I think you kind of answered it, but I'm still going to
Mm,
ask you the question. Maybe there are more. But from what you
okay,
said, I would think is data analytics. And now that we are in the AI generation, I would think
exactly,
is the both right now.
exactly,
So, but I don't know if there's another
exactly.
trend in your industry, like the audit industry, that you think people should be aware about aside from this too.
Yeah, well, the accounting profession is very broad, right? Because if someone say or she's a chartered accountant, you can
Yeah.
function in various capacities, right? Either you
Yeah. But we
function
focus on
as
auditing.
yes, exactly. So you can function as a corporate in-house accountant or even as an internal auditor, right? And
Yeah.
then you can also work as an external auditor, right? So now if you find yourself within the external audit space, right, that's a field or that's an area that there are always a lot of new standards, accounting standards, right? That you need to acclimatize yourself with,
Okay.
right? You need to be aware of the new developments within the industry. For instance, now there is a whole lot of emphasis around sustainability, right? Now,
Yeah.
sustainability has
True.
always been there, right? It's not something new, right? But now there is the need for accountants or auditors to then begin to acquire knowledge to be able to comment on the sustainability reporting of an organization, right? So that's one
Okay.
of, that's a new
New
trend,
trend. Yeah.
right? To be able to provide assurance on the sustainability reports of companies, you know, then beyond that, you also have, new accounting standards, like I mentioned earlier on, being introduced, which you need to get acquainted with. And over and beyond all of these, things that are peculiar to the profession, the overreaching innovation or development within the larger space is deepening our profession tremendously,
Yeah.
right? So for every accountant or auditors that wants to thrive and succeed in this field, need to, flow with the trend, right? You need to flow with the trend in terms of, technology. You need to flow with the
Mm.
trend, in terms of events that are happening within the global environment, right? You need to have an understanding of the economic macros, right? Because there's no way, you want to advise a client, you want to proffer solutions to clients, right? That you would not be able to speak the language of the clients,
Mm.
right? So
True.
take for instance, if you are auditing a company that is in the mining industry, and you don't even have an understanding of what is happening within that space,
Mind
then the
space. Yeah.
question is, how are you going to, you know, give valuable advice and contributions to your clients, right? So back to your question, you need to be aware of, technological innovations happening, events within the economic environment and the macro environments, at large. And also you need to acquaint yourself with technical standards that are constantly changing, within your profession or within the accounting profession.
Interesting. All right. Hey, very interesting. So, if there is somebody looking at becoming an auditor or a chartered accountant, not just auditor, right?
Mm.
So, how will you advise the person to set themselves up for long-term success, right?
Yeah, so it depends on, where is that person in the journey of his or her career, right?
Okay.
The person in question is someone
So, let's
that,
say starting out, like, oh, I'm fresh out of school. I studied accounting. Where do I go from here?
okay, so to answer that question, I think what that person needs to do, if that person is in Nigeria, is to enroll with the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria. That's the body that regulates accounting. I mean, that's like, I think there are essentially two professional institutes, in Nigeria. You have the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, and then you have the Association of National Accountants of Nigeria. So what that person
What if it's
just
a
needs to do,
global scale, right? Because
yeah, that's where
we have different. Okay.
exactly. So that's why I said it depends on where that person is, right? Obviously, if you are not in Nigeria, you cannot write the ICANN exam. If you're in Canada, then you need to, look into CPA, right? Which is like the Canadian accounting body, right? So
Okay.
what that person needs to do is just to go, look into the website of CPA, just go online and then contact the institute. The first thing he or she will be required to do is to submit his or her credential for some sort of initial assessment, right? And then that would determine at what stage will that person actually have to start. That's if so it's the same process, right? Whether you're writing the Nigerian exam or you're writing Canadian exam, or I even know it's the same thing even in the UK and in the US, right? Contact the professional institutes, send them an email, give them your background information. This is what I've studied. Because for someone that has studied accounting in the university and maybe someone that had done other courses, there's that flexibility, right? So it's when they see your credential that they'll be able to advise you to say, this is where you would actually, start from, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
So,
it's not a difficult process.
great.
Mm.
So, could you tell, for the purpose of somebody listening, right, or watching, so could you
Mhm.
tell us what a day in your life as an auditor is? So maybe that might interest somebody to switch.
Okay. Okay, so a typical day, or let me say before the start of a new day,
Hmm.
there's always a to-do list, right? Yeah, because for the kind of industry I find myself in, we charge our clients, based on hours, right? So
Okay.
that's what we sell, right? Because so what that means is that you need to be meticulous with your time, right? So
Mm.
I mean, in a typical day, if I had to key in 8 hours, you know, as end revenue for the firm, right? So what that means is that I need to plan my day very well, So a day before, I need to lock, put into my calendar what task do I intend to have the next day. So obviously within that 8 hours, there are times where, I mean, there are meeting times, right? So where we meet, you know, in the morning just to go through the workflow to say, okay, this is what we had yesterday. These are the clients that we have on board for this week. We have that kind of workflow. Then also within my calendar as well, I need to, block time to say, okay, this is the hours I want to spend on this assignment. Clients A, clients B, client C.
Yeah.
This is the time I want to spend with my team or my colleagues, trying to go through issues. So a typical day is like blocking your calendar, right? I had to block my calendar. Because if I don't do that, you just find out that you might just become so inefficient, right? So one of the ways I tend to approach every day is to stay organized, right? That way I know exact. So if I'm spending too much time on something, I know I'm spending too much time. It's either I leave that task and come back to it and then move to something else, you know, or I just kind of say, okay, I plan to have 4 things done, but now I'm able to do 3. The work requires a lot of brain power, but the good thing is that with proper planning, if you just put in all of those energy between say 9 to maybe 4 o'clock, then you have the remaining time to yourself to typically do any other thing you want to do.
So as an auditor, you have jam-packed days and all of that. So do you have time for some fun, right? Or is it just work, work, work? Because somebody thinking to transition into this career might feel like, oh, this is overwhelming, this is a lot. But do you still have some time for fun, for family? And what are the things you personally do, for fun?
So absolutely, it's a job that requires you to be on top of your game. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think it's peculiar to the audit profession alone, right? Like when you have job to do or when you have a task to achieve, I belong to that school of thought that look, it's better to put in um 2 quality hours, right, than to put in 8 hours that is not really of any high quality, right? So meaning that once it's time to work, I try to avoid distractions. You know, I have a target, I have a goal I want to hit on. And once I hit on that goal, right, for me, it's not the hours per se, right? I mean, there are days where I don't work more than maybe 5 hours. When I say 5 hours, I mean 5 hours effectively, right?
Mm.
But that effective 5 hours, I'm able to achieve a task of maybe 8 hours, right? So, when I find myself in that situation, that yes, this is what I plan to achieve for the day, I've achieved this task for the day, then I have the remaining time to myself, right?
Yeah.
So, and I can use that time for anything I choose to. Like I also I mean, maybe we have conversation for this another time, but
Yeah.
apart from my field of studies, I'm also very passionate about finance and investments, matters, right?
Mm.
So it's an area where I also spend my time into, trying to also develop some skills in that area. So, but again, it's not all about reading, it's not all about book, right?
Yeah.
I also, watch TV like every other person, also.
Yeah.
Exactly. So also, find time, spend with the family. I do a lot of,
Yeah.
I cook a lot, not a lot,
Oh,
but, so, I mean,
interesting.
just take, take back some of the time, due to efficiency in terms of inputs that has gone into the
Yeah.
work, and then channel it to something that, is also what I enjoy doing, right?
Right.
So, yeah. So there's that balance. I mean, people don't need to be scared, right? It's just like any other profession. I'm sure as a data analyst, there are times where, you try to run a code and it's not just working, and, you're just going to keep, you know, pestering until you figure it out.
Until you
So,
figure it out, yeah. And at times you kind of leave it to say, no, I'm going to cool off and come
exactly,
back. Yeah. And when you come
exactly,
back, you just find out that, oh, this line of code, that's where the error is. You just fix it and, you move on.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly,
absolutely. Yeah,
exactly.
I totally understand that.
Yeah.
So do you think, is it difficult to land a job in your field?
No, I think the direct answer is no. It's not difficult. I mean, there are a lot
Okay.
of jobs. I mean, accountants are always never out of jobs. That's just the truth. Especially if you have the technical knowledge, right? If you have
Yeah.
the experience, right? Well, in terms of experience, you can always learn on the job, right? So your experience would depend on what level or what cadre you find yourself starting from, right? But if you're someone that is just trying to transition and move into that field, right? I don't think you need to worry so much, right? Because all you just need to do is, find your feet into the door. Once you find your feet into the door, over time, as you begin to ground your skill, your competency, your knowledge and experience, right? You just discover that more opportunities are going to be presenting its way for you, right? So the direct answer to your question is yes, there are a lot of jobs in our field, right? Either as an accountant or as an auditor, and the field, the profession is very big, right? Some people might just say that, okay, I want to focus on maybe, I want to be a payroll accountant. Some might just say, I want to be a receivable or a payable accountant. Some might say, I want to, work in the bank. I want to work, an industry or whatever. So it's a field that has so many opportunities. The opportunities are just so enormous.
Great. So one last
And
question though. Okay. Okay,
sorry,
go
I just
ahead.
want to
Sorry. Sorry to cut
hit
you.
on something. And it's
Yes, please.
also a field, that tends to empower you, right? So
Mm.
meaning that if you choose not to work for someone, right,
Yeah.
it's a field that you can easily, develop your entrepreneurship skill, right? Because just look around you. There are a lot of people that actually need your service as an accountant,
Mm.
right? Especially if you find yourself in the advanced countries, right? Like, Canada, US, UK, where companies are required and mandated to file their tax returns, right? They are
Yeah.
expected to have their accounting record properly maintained, properly kept. So beyond the fact that it's a profession that, has myriads of job opportunities, it's also a profession that allows anybody that chooses to go the entrepreneurship route, to actually, you know, uh, have that leeway and that leverage as well.
Interesting. So it's a win-win. Like, so you cannot
Exactly.
say you don't have a job. You can create a job.
Exactly. Exactly.
Make, totally makes sense.
I mean,
Totally
I have
makes sense.
friends that,
So,
from when they qualified as chartered accountants, some just worked for 6 months, 1 year, and afterwards they were into the field of entrepreneurship, and today they are doing very well, absolutely very well.
so, so it's not just about you applying for a 9 to 5. You can create a 9 to 5, and you can even hire somebody at the end of the day.
Exactly,
So
exactly,
yeah, that
exactly.
makes sense. That makes sense. So Idris, if you had to go back in time and advise your younger self, what would that be?
Mm. What would that be?
Yeah, like
Maybe
a younger
a
Idris.
younger Idris is one that would have not been too hyper, trying to achieve certain things that eventually were achieved on bed of roses,
Mm.
through the grace of God, right?
Yeah,
So yeah, so because I mean, they we're always like it's either book or nothing, you know, while in school then trying to study for ICANN, the younger interest in infuse so much social
what
life,
fun.
so it was always all about studies, academic, and so on. So, but eventually you realize that, you know, everything has to be properly balanced, right?
Yeah,
So, because in as much as you're trying to, get that academic aspect of life, um, you know, in shape, it's also nice to have that, social connection.
yeah.
Yeah, but it's all good.
Great, 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 great. That's interesting. Yeah, and I think I would also advise myself similarly, really, because when I was in school, I also did 30, 30, 30, no fun, right? And now I don't know how you want to catch up with that. That's gone. So
Mhm.
it's just like now you're trying to infuse some social life into your activities to ensure that you're balancing things like you're working, you have time for social life, you have time for
Mhm.
family, and you also have time for, your development and your personal growth as well. Right. It's
Absolutely.
been nice having you, Idris, and thank you so much for honoring our invitation. And I'm hopeful that one person would have learned one thing or the other from this conversation. And, a couple of things stood out for me, right, in this conversation, especially the last thing you said, being
Mm.
that if you're an accountant, if you study to be an accountant, it's not just about you applying for a 9 to 5. You can
Mhm.
also create job for somebody. And you mentioned your friends that since they
Yes.
left or they graduated from school, they have not
Yes.
done 9 to 5. They created job
Yes.
job for themselves. And I'm sure they
Yes.
also have employees that they pay as well. So that
Yes.
really stood out for me. And thank you
Yes.
so much. We
It-
appreciate you coming. I don't know if you have any
Thank you.
last word.
Well, my last words is just to know that things in life doesn't have to be overly complicated as much as possible. Just keep it simple. You know, it's always nice to have daily, hourly, or even minutes of incremental wins,
Mm.
than trying to want to batch everything just at one goal, right? So every day, you tend to ask yourself, what have I learned today? What value have I added to myself today? And also you keep track, keep a journal of your daily wins, of your daily achievements in life. There are times where you will be, you will hit roadblocks, you know, definitely face obstacles, right? But just know that for every obstacle, it's always a learning point. Like you must try to get the lesson out of it, become successful in your career, to become successful in life generally, and just to be a better you and become, who exactly you envision yourself to become. That's my, last word and of parting word for now. Hopefully,
Yeah.
when I come on your show next time, there are a lot of other things to be discussed.
Yeah, and your last words are profound. I will also hold on to those words, daily win, celebrating it, right? We really need to do more of that. We need to pat ourselves on the back, you know, on a
Yeah,
daily basis. You don't have to wait till the end of the
exactly.
year before you do that.
Exactly.
Idris, thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you so much.
You're
Thank you so
welcome.
much. We appreciate you, and I will catch up with you later. Thank you,
Thank
everyone, for
you.
watching. And I
Thank
hope
you.
that you will gain one thing or the other. Thank you, Idris. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.